ones and make this up, or up at the top. They're all, most of them, well, a number of them are related, which is why I created this one, so you can see them all as a whole.
All right, do you want to drive the conversation then, or I'll follow,
sure,
or whatever?
Sure, and David, you can chime in as appropriate. The first one is relatively simple. It's pretty costly to advance the reader all the way to the end. Doing it yourself, well, if we have a method on it, it's, well, of course, simpler than doing it yourself, and we can just set the state to the end of the sequence and consumed and all that, which is pretty fast.
In what situation does someone do that?
What's that for?
When they're like when they're parsing through, for example, and they're like looking for something, like let's say you're reading through something that's semicolon delimited or whatever, and you're going through there and you don't find another one. You've gone through all the ones that were properly terminated. In some cases, you don't want that last chunk, and you would just want to push it to the end, so the thing that passed you, the reader, will be finished.
I see. So it's a composition scenario.
Yeah. Yep. So this one's come up quite a bit, or people have requested it quite a bit. You can do it right now if you want to like advance it X amount of bytes, but you have to calculate that yourself, and it's of course pretty expensive, or can be, as opposed to just setting it to end, right? Essentially, what it's doing internally is setting the current position to the end of the sequence and saying that it's finished, right? There's a bool internally. And updating the consumed count and all that, but that's, it's just setting a bunch of properties.
When do we use the advanced terminology versus the skip terminology?
Advanced, let me bring that up again.
Since it seems like this could also be skip to end.
It could be. We aren't using, like, originally, and I'm sure you remember, it's like use skip in the method names, but we changed all those to advance. So there are advanced past. So we have advanced and advanced past. It used to be skip past and skip to, but we settle on advance.
So we use advance in the method names and skip in parameter names?
We don't have any skipping at all in the parameters yet.
Oh, okay.
And
we have TryPeek.
No, in the existing APIs.
In the existing APIs for parameters, we don't have anything that's equivalent to skip. So, we may want to call that advanced, but in peaking, you're not really advancing the reader. So
it's offset, right? Skip is offset or start.
Yeah. I didn't use start for skip because I felt skip was more like start you don't know whether that, it's potential to be a little confused as to whether that means start from the current position or start from the beginning of the reader. That may just be me,
I guess, but still the same problem. I guess relative versus absolute.
What's that?
I guess so. It could be offset, but is it offset from the beginning of the sequence or from the current reader?
Yeah,
position?
Same thing.
Same issue, yeah.
So skip seems to be really obvious that it's from the current position.
To me, the problem with skip is it implies a side effect, right?
Which, it plays advancing.
Which I think is not great. I mean, honestly, like offset is probably the most sensible one because offsets are usually relative to something, right? They're usually not just relative to zero. So I think in a reader it makes sense to say they're just relative to where you're currently at, right?
And that's what we currently have, and well, there are a variety of APIs where we use offset, and it's referring to where you currently are.
Yeah. All right, great. I'm fine with that. No problem. The unread sequence, we already have like unread span. And that's getting the in the advanced end, sometimes you do want whatever is left, and that's hard to get right now. You have to slice it. It's not terrible, but a lot of people have asked for that as well.
Why didn't we add unread sequence when we added unread span? Was there a reason?
No, it just hadn't come up in the scenarios because we were mainly testing this against the JSON reader when we wrote this, and we just didn't need it. Never came up. but it's come up a number of times for people. A number of people have asked for getting the remaining sequence out of it.
Yeah, it's useful for ASP.NET, for example, for parsing a form. We parse and then the pair, so you do token equals token and the and is optional. So there's no and, you want the entire end of the sequence from the value. There's key equals value and key equals value, and the last one doesn't have an and. You scan for ands. If there's no and, you grab the whole end of the sequence to parse the end of it. Last key value pair.
So it's really a convenience thing here. I mean, you could do it right now by just getting
slicing
by the position, but so is unread span. Unread span's a convenience one as well. So they kind of go together. Although unread span is the current section, when unread sequence is everything.
Oh, what happens if you do unread span and there's multiple segments?
It's just the current one.
Really?
Yeah, it's the unread current span. It says it pretty explicitly in the comments, but
why set position instead of seek, for example?
What's that?
Why set position instead of seek?
Oh, no reason other than it was, had side effects and was the setter.
Should we consider
So
doing it
we have a
in
getter
order?
position.
Having the discussion in order, because
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
we can defer this discussion after.
That one's probably the most. Well, I won't say anything. I'll probably jinx it.
So where are we trying? Sorry, we were on unread sequence.
Yeah, that one is useful, right?
Yeah, it's just like the unread span is pure convenience. The user could have done that themselves, but since we had unread span, it makes sense to add in.
To be clear, we did not change AdvanceToEnd, right? We are okay with that one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
For TryPeek, what are the current overloads, or none exist?
We have one that just has an out T.
We only have for T. So there's TryPeek of T value, out T value. There's no skipping.
Right.
moment.
I guess I was wondering what this looks like next to the existing overload. Like if the out is the first argument and the existing TryPeek, should skip come before it or after it?
Out has to be last.
But normally we keep out last, yeah. Which means when we add new input positions, we just usually fill them in from the left.
Why does that have to be last?
Why out has to
Or
be
it's just
last?
or it's just a convention?
That's just a convention we have in FDG that all
Yeah.
parameters should go last.
That was the only reason I put it there instead of adding it to the end of it, because that seemed to be what that was my presumption, is that we typically put the out at the end.
We have violated that in a few places.
We have, it really sucks when you have input, output, and optionals, and then there are only so many places you can put stuff, unfortunately. But generally speaking, out should go last. Which means sometimes you fill in from left.
So TryPeek offset.
Should it be start and length instead of a skip count in all the APIs? Because read-only sequence, read-only span both use start and length.
I thought we had said offset.
Yeah, but we don't use offset in the slice API.
We use start.
We use start.
Yeah. So it could be start. But
Does the sequence reader have a concept of a current position within the reader itself?
Yes. Yes.
So this is really like offset from current, not
Yes.
offset from beginning of
Correct.
reader.
Yes.
Yeah. That was my initial thing about this. It requires a little bit of cognition there. No, we're
we also
talking-
support going backwards, right? Skipping back is illegal.
Yes.
Right.
So the reader is primarily forward. We do have a rewind method.
Yep.
But it has a lot of caveats written on it about how expensive it can potentially be. If you have to cross back past a segment, you have to scan all the way from the beginning again.
Yep.
So, okay, what do we decide then on count and skip? So for skip, you said earlier, we should probably call it offset, but then I just sort of start. So are we going with start and length then?
Length?
I think length makes more sense for count. For the first one, offset or start either, I think it's fine. I don't have anything.
Oh, I don't like length. So
Index.
I feel like count is better. I don't know.
Again, we don't use count anywhere.
We don't? Okay, length then.
And also, you're returning a value, sequence and spans. That the count is equate to their.
Okay.
I have hot takes on that, by the way, when we get there.
But before we go there, so like, okay.
String.seq we use offset.
Oh yeah, but in this the APIs that surround this domain is all start and length.
It feels really strange to me that there are two overloads of TryPeek, both of which take an int as the first argument. But depending on what the out is for the second, sometimes it's interpreted as one thing, and sometimes it's interpreted as something else.
That was Jeremy's feedback.
So what's that? I'm not sure I follow.
There's two overloads of TryPeek, one that's in skip out t, and one that's in skip out read only span. Skip and count have different meanings, right?
Yeah. They do.
Correct. And yes.
I think that's bad.
But it's not based on sequence or non-sequence, right? It's just based on whether you pass in 3 arguments or 2 arguments, right?
No, they're both 2 arguments.
Yeah. The other thing is
So
if you're using...
One's the out t and the other one's the
Same
out
one's
for
the
the t.
So whenever you have methods, I guess I'll give my hot take now. Whenever you have methods like this, where you have the same signature except for out something, it prevents the ability to use out var anywhere. Like, it means that you already, you have to explicitly write the type of the thing that you're outing.
Yes.
And there's also potentially the risk that somebody will call out on the same instance that's also the ref this parameter to one of these methods, which means you could actually be mutating this struct while these methods are running.
That doesn't apply here, though, because the out is a different type than...
It does for the other overloads of TryPeek.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Oh, no, SequenceReader, sorry.
Yes. No, it's not the same as the sequence itself.
No, it actually still matters, but we'll come back to it later.
What? Why does it matter?
Isn't the SequenceReader backed by a read-only sequence?
Yeah.
Yes.
And is it backed by a ref to a read-only sequence or a copy of a read-only sequence?
Copy.
Copy.
Okay, never mind.
I see.
So we have, so this exists today already on this type. So the try read to overloads that you out either a span or a sequence.
Yeah.
And the span may or may not allocate, and the sequence never allocates.
But they don't accept another argument of the same type that has a different meaning depending on which you use, right?
Yeah, so what's new here is the first argument, the int, that can be either a skip or a count based on which one you call, which is kind of
One
kind of
So
wonky, but
one potential here is that we could try to actually we're not using that anywhere else, but like change the name of the other ones that that are returning a TryPeek sequence or something. But it's not we actually have sequence that's kind of overloading it.
names, but
A TryPeek span and TryPeek sequence.
Well, we could also just remove the overloads that only take account for the spans and the sequence, right? We always force you to
Yes,
pass
that's
in
true
zero.
too.
say that again.
So instead of doing this, you could just decide to remove effectively this overload and this overload. So basically, you always have to pass in 0 as the first argument, which seems
Yeah, I'm fine
cleaner
with that.
than having like different names.
Okay.
So by the way, we already have APIs where out is the first parameter, but those APIs have optional arguments. So the other alternative is maybe we make out t and out read only span and out read only sequence the first argument.
We have that?
Yeah, TryRead2. TryRead2 has out sequence or span as the first argument, then delimiter, and then advanced pass is the optional bool.
Yep.
Okay, maybe
So
try that.
That doesn't solve the issue of the int count and int skip.
Yeah,
being
because
the
it's
same.
you're right.
no, but it does make it easier to use the one that has the 2 arguments, right? If one of them has a default.
Sure, you would make count be first and then skip be second with a default of 0.
Although count being first is kind of a troll.
Yeah. Okay, why would count be first? Your
Because
Because skip is the one that you have to give a count, really.
The skip is optional.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think having one overload is better.
Yeah.
You force a pass skip and count all the time up, and it's kind of gross, but That's confusing.
But then that causes. That would then be weird with. So what would the TryPeek that takes an int and an out t look like?
Well, the count is implied to be 1, right?
But then skip would be in the same position as count in the other overloads.
Shouldn't count be
Yes.
long anyway?
Ooh,
Like, shouldn't all of these be long?
it should be. It should actually be long.
For
I
the
guess,
sequence, yeah.
for sequence.
No, I mean, even skip. Like, shouldn't that be long
Yep,
as well?
yep.
Yeah,
They should be.
I mean, you
Sorry.
have an overload too, but
It doesn't make sense for the span one for the count to be
Right,
long.
the count can't be longer, yeah.
But skip should always be long, and or offset rather, as we're saying. Offset should be long, and count should be int or long.
So Steven, if you remove the overloads that take just count, why is there a confusion between TryPeek that takes skip and TryPeek that takes skip and count?
Because you weren't talking about just removing those overloads, you were talking about also making skip be optional and second in the other
I
overloads.
see. Yeah.
Well, in most, even if it's long, most people aren't going to type 1L. They're just going to type 1. And so that implicitly converts to either int or long. So you still have the overload problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think long versus int to me is not good enough. VNG.
Not a problem in F#. They don't have implicit conversions.
win. What's the solution to this? What's the thought to solve this?
I think the simplest one is we keep the p-argument overloads and not make them optional.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So you pass. So
Skip
have
becomes zero.
so what about TryPeek? That takes just out t.
No, it has skip and out t.
Okay.
But the
that's
other
it.
two, the count ones, we can remove.
Emo, show me your right.
So what?
What'd you write down? Your like fix for this.
So what I so far have, let me actually.
Sublime.
Yes,
This
because
is recorded, right?
of course.
And live stream.
But do you see that my header doesn't say unlicensed?
At least.
You paid for it, Sublime too.
I do. I'm a good citizen. And it's actually my personal license too.
Not someone else's.
Is this thing word wrapped?
It is, unfortunately, which also, oh god, this is really great to see. What a trouble. Here we go. So this is what I have. So my suggestion was to nuke these guys.
Yes. So for the ones
Yeah,
that
if we nuke those and don't, and just everything else, nothing else defaults, same order. That solves my concern.
And the ones that out of span, those have to be an
Int.
int for length.
Yeah,
I think, yeah.
or we could leave them long for symmetry and just do parameter checking either.
So what should be int?
The span.
The one that takes span.
Span overload.
The one that
This one here?
outspan.
Should
No,
have
no, no.
long length. Only the length parameter.
Not this one.
Not this one?
TryPeek.
Oh, these guys here.
Yeah,
So
first offset, right? That one.
Yes.
so the offset needs
Sorry.
to
No, only the length.
Just length.
Only the length.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't the offset also be in it?
Because the sequence itself can have a long length, and
Yeah.
the only restriction on span is that the spans can't be longer than a
Oh, I
32 max
see.
Oh,
value.
it's because offset applies to this and length applies to value.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so then. Alright. Are we happy with this?
Yeah.
Do we have that anywhere else in the API where what's normally a pairing of offset and length that applies to a single thing is actually split and applied to two different things?
What do you mean by that?
Do we have the same pattern
Well,
in the API?
I guess I guess offset and length arguably both apply to this. It's just that length is also constrained by the out.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
This is the only one. This is the first API where we actually specify the length.
Yeah.
Specify on the input the length of the output.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of have that on stream, if you will, right? because stream has a long length, right? But then when you actually copy buffers out, you don't get to use longs either, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Also, I believe this is like the first time we are doing out span. Or an API that's returning span. All the time, all the existing APIs, we import a span.
No, we have both. So in Reader, if you do TryRead2, you get out span too. You can say TryRead2 new line.
Aside from this aside from this type. So this type is the one that established a new pattern of like outing a span, which
So, Emo, can we take another note that we need to consider for the framework design guidelines? What happens if a struct type has an out, the exact same struct type as a parameter in one of the methods? Because that's going to lead to a pit of failure, I think, if we have that.
Sorry, say this again one more time.
So we should take an action item that we need to consider as part of overall framework design guidelines. What happens if you have a structure type that has a method on it that has an out parameter that's of that exact same type to you? Because that could allow you to mutate a struct while the method is actually running, even if it's a ref struct, which we normally assume can never happen. I ran into this problem with UTF-8 span as well. I have some APIs that out a UTF-8 span, and I'm like, oh my god, they can mutate ref this while it's running, and now, yeah,
it's not a feature.
It's a feature, but I think something most people wouldn't expect. So we should at least consider it for FTG.
Just to make sure, I mean that happens very frequently when it's a ref. You're special casing to out.
It's if you have this and an out of the same type, basically, and they're both refs.
Right, right. I was saying we frequently see that with ref parameters rather than out parameters.
We do,
You're just
yes.
specific calling out parameters.
We do.
Okay.
It becomes a little more problematic when the T is a ref struct, because we make assumptions that they can't be torn, they can't be mutated unexpectedly, and so on.
I might be reading way too much into this. Is there a reason that the first TryPeek overload is visually separate from the rest of them? Like, is there something fundamentally different?
Just that we already have one that's an out T. It was just for the comment purposes.
I see.
I probably should have put the TryPeeks together, but it was,
I can
composing this.
What's the benefit of TryPeek with out of sequence versus just using unread sequence.slice?
Sorry, can you say that again?
TryPeek with an out of sequence, is that not equivalent to just slicing unread sequence here?
No, because unread sequence is from where your reader is today. TryPeek doesn't advance the reader. So TryPeek is saying, I'm not going to touch the reader, but I'll give you the slice. Unread sequence.
Why would unread sequence advances the reader?
No.
No, it doesn't.
I'm saying unread sequence is from the current. Oh,
So is
I
TryPeek.
see.
So, but you don't have a skip on unread sequence.
No, but unread sequence.slice as well.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, if you wanted everything else, but like it's just awkward to write, and that's
Really? Unread sequence.slice offset
I see what you're saying.
length?
Yeah.
Seems equivalent, yeah.
Yeah, you could just slice the both unread span and unread sequence with offset and length.
I mean, there's a bit of an argument for symmetry in the APIs, but
That's a good point.
Is accessing the unread sequence a cheap operation? O of 1?
Yes, because it's just a slice.
Okay.
Of the,
I guess the only difference would be if performance issues aside, because I have no idea how these are implemented. Is it common that you'd invoke TryPeek using it for its argument validation, like using it for it returning false? Because then,
I guess the other part of it too is that which I didn't really think of until started digging, but like the ones that return a span are going to be much faster than usually much faster than getting the sequence and turning it into a span. Because the whole thing is designed around the fact that you don't cross the segments that often. So quite frequently when you're TryPeeking and taking a span out, you're just going to be getting a slice of the current span. Getting the span out is pretty expensive. or potentially hugely expensive if you're backed by memory. So while we could get rid of the one that outs the sequence, because it doesn't really have any advantage, then there would be missing for symmetry purposes. And getting rid of the one span has a pretty profound impact if you actually want to span.
Yeah, so actually going back to Corey's point, do we need any of the new TryPeek APIs if the user can just slice either unread span or unread sequence?
You'd have to calculate
Yes.
it yourself to see how much is left in the current sequence.
It's easier that way.
I see.
Count
So
can be
convenience.
larger than the current span.
the whole reason for adding the TryPeeks is for the validation purposes.
No, for ease of use.
Ease of use. Yeah.
Because the code you have to write is like, I'm at the end of the current span if I am advanced one, get the next block. Like, not trivial, right? And
I see.
So I guess the situation would be like if unread span, which I understand only returns the rest of the current segment.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. So if count was 0, sorry, if skip was 0, then TryPeek would presumably be the same thing. But if count pushed you past the current segment, then could just use unread span.slice because it'd be returning the wrong thing.
Correct. So there's a copy that happens here just like the other APIs.
Sorry, what'd you say, Jeremy?
There's a copy that happens in that case, and like the other APIs, and it allocates a new array.
In which case, if
When you cross segments and you're outing a span. But there's a lot of logic to piece those together and copy them in, so.
Sorry, take a step back. I wouldn't get an allocation from unread span, right?
No, you wouldn't. I'm just saying for.
I get an allocation from TryPeek if I skipped past the current segment. My assumption is
if your span crosses segments, yes, you'll get an allocation.
won't return false.
Huh?
Return false.
No, because the other APIs don't do that either. They put it together for you. And we have we had a long discussion about adding an allocator option to the sequence reader.
So how do I decide when I want to use TryCopy2 versus TryPeek? Because if I'm going to end up in the case where it allocates and copies, I'd be better off just using TryCopy2.
no.
Yeah, TryCopy2 is more
yeah.
awkward, and people didn't like it. That was the original answer for things, because then they have to manage that. In a lot of cases, people don't care, which is what the feedback was. They don't really care that it allocates. In those rare cases, they didn't want to optimize it that far. It's just, and they disliked having to deal with it themselves.
Yeah, but so the concern with TryCopy2 is that you're always forced to copy. But then the concern with this API is that it'll sometimes allocate. So if people don't care about the allocations, why would they care about the data copy?
Yeah, so there's because the allocations don't happen very often, the copies happen all the time.
I see.
So it was the combination of those two things. If they didn't want to deal with having to maintain the buffer, and they wanted a slice when it was just a slice. So
if I don't want to allocate and I don't want to copy, what code do I write?
well, you don't want either. You have to use
The
sequence.
Or read it by at a time.
Yeah.
Or read unread
Or
span.
write the complicated logic yourself to
Yeah.
like figure out when you want to slice or not.
And that's not a common case, is people not wanting to copy and not wanting to allocate?
And not use there's three things: not copy, not allocate, and not use sequence. Right?
What do you mean by not use sequence?
Sequence doesn't allocate.
So this is a sequence reader. What?
The one that outputs the one that outputs a read-only sequence doesn't allocate, doesn't copy.
I see.
So if you're dealing completely in subsequences, then you're not getting any of that. It is potentially slower depending on your use case, because slicing a span is pretty quick. But if your primary thing is never allocating, then you would do the sequence.
I see.
I think the question, so like for example in Kestrel and in parts of ASP.NET Core where we use sequence reader or use sequences, what we do is we have kind of two cases. One case where we do the whole thing where if you are in a single span, don't copy, so you span directly. Otherwise, if you're less than 128 bytes, stack alloc. Otherwise, array pool. The issue with putting that into the APIs are you can't really stack alloc inside the API, so you're forced to use try-copy like always. The only alternative is you can either do kind of a heap allocation across segments, or in the best case where you are in a single segment span because you select before doing the actual TryPeek, then you can return an uncopyable span before doing anything. A copy span.
So Kestrel never uses a TryPeek that outs a span, or would never use that, right?
I want to say in the HTTP parser we don't. We do the hard logic of parsing a span at a time, and we handle the cross segments in a kind of a gross way. TryPeek taking a skip would help our code today not be terrible.
But because really the one that returns really span could allocate, you wouldn't use that.
Which one? TryPeek? Yeah,
any of the TryPeek overloads that return a span.
Yeah. But in other parts of the code, we do today hazard where we get a sequence that's sliced, and we say if single segment, use it, otherwise to array. Because it's rare enough in benchmarks that it doesn't matter.
Oh, I see.
So in other parts of the we do this logic already.
That's actually, from some of those examples, is where I went ahead and made that thing essentially to array. Because really the span has an optimized one that like looks to see if it fits within the current span.
Yeah.
And then it basically falls back to the one that returns the sequence and then does a to array on it. That's essentially the logic for this. Any of the overloads that do the same thing. There's all the other TryReads and stuff.
The other elephant in the room that's kind of wonky dealing with sequences is that you can have an empty segment in between the sequences, which makes the thing super painful. But the reader kind of papers over all those issues. So if you TryPeek, it'll skip over an empty sequence in the middle of your sequence, which hopefully no one creates. But just in case it happens, if you TryPeek, one and the next character in the sequence is an empty character, you wouldn't get that. It would go over that and skip to the next thing.
Yeah, the segment crossing, like those cases that he's talking about in particular, it's difficult anyway, period. But when you're having to cross multiple ones, you have the empty ones in it. That's the kind of one of the big points or selling points of the sequence reader is that you just don't have to think about that at all.
Yeah.
I feel like I would like a TryRead2 and TryCopy that don't allocate to let me know.
Yeah.
We have TryRead2 already.
Do we? Okay.
But
they're tied to delimiters. Well, which I guess
but they do allocate.
So we had there's another discussion that we had started when we did this originally about potentially having an allocator delegate.
But then you
or
can't
something
use stack, right?
No.
Oh, I can't. Potentially. I'd have to page that back in to look at it.
You can't use that.
The original proposals. There were a couple different options.
You could use the array pool.
Yeah,
You want to not.
for sure.
It seems like the caller will always have to write the code you just outlined, right? How big is it? Is it worth me copying? Is it worth me allocating? Is it worth me putting on the stack?
That was the benefit of giving the caller the role of passing the span. They can decide where they want their allocation to be, whether it's stack, alloc, array pool, or heap alloc.
But the problem is it's more than that, right? Because TryCopy2 you don't want to copy in the general case, right? It's more like, is it crossing boundaries? Then give me the thing. If it's not crossing boundaries, then how big is it? And so like that logic has to live with the call side, right?
Yeah.
It's try get or copy if you can't get. Kind of what it is, right? So give me the span if you can. Otherwise, use this callback to the delta to allocate for me.
Yeah, I originally had an API on this that like outed a read-only sequence and took a span as a input as a optional buffer. So you had to provide it it would just slice or use the buffer, but it's really awkward to communicate how to use that.
Yeah.
So we can still look at that again and see whether we can come up with a reasonable way to express that in the API surface. But we cut it from the first time because there was a great deal of concern about how people would cognate utilizing it.
Yeah, pretty bad.
Is it common that somebody might pass a sequence reader as an in parameter to a method?
I mean, by mistake.
Wouldn't they
Well,
do it on purpose as an optimization?
Well, I noticed that
pass
you
it as
have
in if
you
wanna
have other
not use
APIs
it.
on SequenceReader that are annotated with read only. Do these APIs also require such annotations?
I guess the TryPeek ones do.
The TryPeek, unread sequence,
Unread sequence.
TryCopy2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, should that be reflected
Yes.
here? Okay.
Yeah. In the only case I've seen it that isn't a mistake is when people can't afford to find where to go next and not move the current position. I've seen it once and I thought it was a mistake.
So these TryPeek APIs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, the reason I asked is because I noticed that some other APIs were annotated as such, which made me think that you had a
Yes.
scenario for
These
that.
should be read
Yeah, all of these.
So the scenario for those things are using us for the other ones. The ones that are read only is like the ones that you want that have you're passing in, I believe. Let me bring this back up. It's the copy one in particular because when you're it doesn't show it in this one.
But yeah, I guess we would follow whatever the current existing APIs have, i.e. TryPeeks are read-only and all the properties.
The things that take an input for a span, like I would put read-only where it is meant to be read-only. The key one was the ones where it took an input for a span.
Okay.
Is that you could pass a stack allocated one if it didn't actually change. That would be the copy to one, right?
Okay.
That was the critical one.
Because I would imagine that we would care about such annotations in the API review because it actually does affect the public surface.
Annotations of what?
Things like
making
read-only.
them read-only. So effectively, unread sequence should be marked read-only, all the TryPeek should be
Yes.
marked read-only, and TryCopy2 should be marked read-only.
Yep.
AdvanceToEnd and TryRead
Yeah.
and SetPosition will not be.
Okay, sorry, say this again because I was just.
Everything except AdvanceToEnd and SetPosition.
And TryRead. TryRead.
And TryRead, yes.
Okay, everything else. So AdvanceToEnd is not.
Read-only. Unread sequence is read-only.
What about the property? Can we mark them as
Yes.
Yeah, property
yes.
getter can be marked.
just the getter, not the property, right?
Correct.
No, the property itself.
Well, the read-only get is the syntax.
The getter, the property itself gets it.
Our reference summary doesn't show that.
And
It
then
marks property.
That's a bug. That's
Was-
weird.
why is it?
Oh, maybe. You know what? I bet it's because implementation stuff. Never mind. You're right.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
right.
So can you put read only on properties or not?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. Because I mean,
Yeah, the current one has it.
No,
right,
I
TryRead,
think
TryRead,
the
and
location
TryPeek would
have-
be.
the only on the
TryPeek would be.
Okay.
Okay, TryCopy would be as well, right? SetPosition wouldn't be, and
Because there's a
read wouldn't be, and advance wouldn't be. Okay, makes sense.
Because they mutate the state of the struct.
All right. For SetPosition, I'm honestly undecided.
they were left for the one that's most contentious.
Is that contentious?
I think so.
Why?
It's contentious because there's a whole slew of reasons, but it leads to writing inefficient code is one potential issue with it. As far as cost, when you're using a sequence reader, like one of the biggest things is actually getting the span out that it works on. So, it's better to not, when you're passing in another sequence position, we have to go get the span for that particular one and deal with that. And if it's backed by memory, that's pretty expensive. It's not technically needed. We can still do it faster by using internals on sequence position, on sequence position and the sequence, which we would probably eventually want to add a public API to do that if we did. But then there's some confusion too about what that means, or at least it's been raised by some of the people who've been commenting on this about like, what does it mean when it comes to consumed? And there's some awkwardness around if you pass in a sequence position. This exists for other ones that take them, but if the sequence position isn't actually in the sequence, you'll error out.
Can you go backward with this API?
Yes.
But not past.
Only in one API. There's only, you can rewind. That's it.
But you can't go. You can't back up before the current segment, correct?
You can. It's just super expensive.
The sequence reader maintains a pointer to the very beginning of the sequence.
Because it maintains a pointer to the original sequence, right? So
is that an implementation detail or is that a contractual guarantee?
It's a contractual guarantee.
Okay.
Hold on, I thought the idea was that you can. That's the whole point of this advancing thing, that you know when you can release earlier buffers. No, you always have to assume that the entire buffer has to stay around forever.
So read-only sequence itself does not have a pointer back to the very beginning, but I guess this type does.
Well, the position
read-only
itself
sequence
stores where to start from. So
yeah, you have a beginning and an end.
Oh, was I incorrect about the read-only sequence statement, Jeremy?
Yes.
Okay.
You have a beginning and an end in the read-only sequence.
Okay.
So you're saying read-only sequence always keeps the
positions.
entire buffer chain in memory no matter what?
Sounds like it.
No, because that's not true. Like once you slice a sequence, your start position change. So even though the sequence has two cursors, start and end, slicing a sequence changes your start position and now your old previous.
Jeremy, it sounds
Correct.
like you're saying that somewhere in the object graph is still a reference back to the origin.
the sequence
Yeah,
position.
sequence reader has a property on it for the original sequence.
Okay.
No, the sequence reader does, but read-only sequence doesn't.
No, I get that. Yeah.
Oh, sequence position. Did we do that in order to figure out quickly if your sequence position was within the same sequence? Is that why we did that?
Well, it basically has an object and an index, right?
Yeah.
And I think that
I don't think sequence position holds.
No, I think it points to the current node plus the offset
yeah.
inside of it, right?
Yeah, that's it.
You were saying, Jeremy?
segment.
So the sequence reader itself has the original sequence, and then it has two additional sequence positions for the current and the next segment.
But regardless, it sounds like sequence reader has as a contractual guarantee you can always back up to the origin of the sequence.
Yeah, we have rewind
Correct,
API.
yes, because we also exposed the original sequence that it was built on. So,
But that means
Which
if I
has
parse
the
a
original
4 gigabyte file, then by the time I'm 3 gigabytes in, I still have the whole 4 gigabytes in memory, right?
It doesn't have to be in memory per se. It could be loaded on demand.
Just like stream doesn't necessarily have it all in, but you can seek to any position in the stream.
Actually, you can't be loaded on demand because it's all a read-only span.
I was about to say, like, I don't think you can do this on demand because what will be your hook? You basically give people raw access to it.
Once you return the span, you're stuck. You have to assume someone's holding on to it forever.
That's the thing with the stream, right? The stream doesn't actually hold any buffers, right? You pass in the buffer you want the data to be copied into, right? So in that case, stream can be lazy, but this thing can't be. So if you pass a 4 gigabyte file, well, like, as you go through the file, like, you allocate more and more memory until you're done.
I guess you could then map it. But now you're returning on 6 spans. So.
Sure, memory mapping would work, yeah. Let the OS handle it. But
you're typically using this in a loop and creating multiple sequence readers, potentially, depending on what came back. So, because you're using a pipeline, right, to get is the common scenario. Is David still there?
No,
he stepped out.
He ran out. It was too depressing, I think.
So, but like the typical pattern, like certainly from the originating thing and what most people are using it for, is they're using it on a pipeline.
Yeah.
And you're getting a sequence from the pipeline and you're processing data from it, and then you're getting a new sequence from the pipeline because you've reached the end of the data that might be available.
It's an interesting thing, though. It basically means it's actually beneficial if you would basically use multiple readers rather than just having one reader for the whole file.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is a cost to creating a sequence reader, and effectively SetPosition is doing that. You're essentially just abstracting the fact that you're creating a whole nother sequence reader, but with the difference being that like you have a different start. Or there are two things. One, it depends on what you care about, right? If you care about the other issue may help a little bit with that. So hold on.
So to be clear, SetPosition is expensive because you potentially have to basically loop over all the buffers to find the one where you're at. Is that it?
Yeah, and that itself is not so bad because you have the position itself, because they're just objects.
Right.
You're just kind of set at the beginning, but like the calculating the consumed count, yes, that requires some scanning. And the other part about it is getting the span out again. The current span is actually potentially pretty expensive.
Effectively, resetting the reader is expensive. It's not the fact that you're not restarting from the beginning.
So that means like no matter what the position is, it's going to be expensive. Yeah. Even if it's like 2 bytes ahead, it would still be the same cost.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So why does it return bool and it's not called tryset?
That was a mistake, I think.
Okay. And why is it SetPosition rather than seek?
Yeah, so I think
because we have a position property already.
Right, but like for example, Stream has both a position property which you can get and set, and then it also has a seek API.
Yeah.
Because you seek other seek ones typically, and when the Stream too have a type of seeking is involved. This does not.
Yeah, seeking is
so like
usually relative.
You can be relative or whatever else. You're just setting a position. No. You're not seeking.
Yeah, I mean there is the ability to have it relative to your current position, but it's not. Yeah, strictly required.
Yeah, the actual API takes a seek
from a start.
Yeah, from start or from current position.
So Tanner, why did you say this would be a try API?
Because it returns a bool.
Only because I had a bool.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, and under what circumstance would this API ever return false?
It wouldn't be a bool. It shouldn't be a bool. It'll throw if you actually try to use a position.
All you know the session is since it's bool, it should be try. It shouldn't be bool.
It shouldn't be bool. Yeah,
it should just be bool.
Yeah, just void. Okay.
So we iterated a number of times on the original ask, and
because the thing is, the sequence position you get back from the sequence, and if you give it a bad sequence position, like that's on you.
Yeah, well, it'll throw on the case.
Because those can't be fabricated from thin air. They always have to be gotten from an API.
Okay.
So one concern, I mean, there were a bunch of, in the other issues, there were a bunch of APIs that were taking sequence position, like TryPeek, TryAdvanceTo, etc. We didn't bubble it up here, but one concern of passing sequence position to this type is we effectively don't have any other API outside of read-only sequence that accepts sequence position. And partly because only read-only sequence creates sequence positions, and creating a sequence position out of thin air is a bit of failure, effectively.
But on this API, it would make sense, though, because this is guaranteed backed by a read-only sequence. So it's
sure, but the sequence position you pass in doesn't have to be backed by the same, doesn't have to come from the sequence read-only sequence that was passed to the sequence reader.
No, but that's a general problem with read-only sequence in general. Like
it's just this would be the first time we'd expose it on here, and I don't like this particularly because like the most efficient way to use the reader is to go forward only, and the more we introduce random access to the thing, the more it's going to encourage, in my opinion, that people will utilize it inefficiently and not understand it. It requires more understanding about how to do it right, but generally speaking, set position is terrible for performance.
Yeah, so
Did you say there's already a get position?
Yeah, there's a getter.
And what do you use it for?
It's the current position.
No, but what does someone do with the resulting sequence position?
Pass it to something else, or
you
slice.
Can pass it to pipe readers to advance.
Yeah, I've used that before just to.
That's actually the most common pattern there is pipe reader. So like you're iterating. You've gotten a sequence. You created a reader, and you're doing some parsing. You get the reader back. You get the current position. You're passing that as it's consumed, right? on when you're getting the next sequence from the pipeline. You have to tell it how much you've eaten out of the current sequence. And that's what position, that's the primary thing to use position for. That's the critical one.
So what's the scenario
So I guess I'm
someone
not.
would use set
Sorry, I was going to say,
position
I guess I'm not clear on what the concern is then, other than from a usability perspective, we already have an API that returns a sequence position. We already have APIs that accept sequence positions.
We don't have
we
APIs
don't-
that accept sequence
We
position.
don't inside SequenceReader.
No, but we do in other types.
The only
Sure,
time you
sure.
have it is read-only sequence.
And those are just as prone to someone creating one that's not associated with it and passing it in, right?
I mean,
Sure,
it's
and
the whole point of the
that,
tag.
that,
is
that
that-
problem exists. It's just this would be the first time it would be exposed on this thing.
But because this is a wrapper around read-only sequence, I don't see it as a bad thing. Like, it's a pass-through. So,
No, that's not the critical part. The
Yeah.
critical part for me is simply that it's like encourages using this in a way that's not performant.
Sure, but I would argue you just gave the counterexample, which is constructing a sequence position is not like, as easy as passing in an int, right? I have to somehow get it from somewhere. I can't just new it up easily. So I think that means, generally speaking, you will probably do the right thing because you're not easily prone to just compute a number and pass it in.
so set position always resets to the beginning and then goes forward, correct?
No,
Okay.
because the so like we would.
So set position does not
Well,
involve the segment.
there's
Okay.
internally speaking, there's an object and an index essentially on each sequence position.
Yes.
And in our internal implementation of this, we would be checking that to see, like, in optimizing, is that sequence position actually in the current segment? Then we can do it pretty fast compared to like seeking. Outside of that, we'd have to scan all the way from the beginning again.
So this is
that's-
primarily expensive because we need to populate the consumed property.
populating the consumed property and getting a span out again.
Okay.
Because like
So getting a
The
consumed
normal-
property essentially we have
what's
to
that?
iterate the entire sequence, figure out
yeah,
where we're
and
at.
you
right?
do in the if you ever get the length, which is pretty common, then we have to walk the sequence to do that. Well, we don't, but like we call length on. There's length on read-only sequence.
So what if we actually did the same thing that you did for the JSON APIs, where we don't have the ability to seek a sequence reader, but we have the ability to clone the current state of the sequence reader?
You do, and that's the way you do it now.
How do you clone the sequence reader? It's a rough struct.
Just set sequence reader to sequence reader.
Yeah, but
Create
it's a
new
rough
sequence.
struct.
We do it internally.
But that I can't do this across an await, for instance. So read-only sequence is not a rough struct, but sequence reader itself is.
Correct.
Which means that sequence reader can't be boxed, for instance. But what Asen did for the JSON APIs is he introduced basically like a state that could be boxed and unboxed. And the idea is you could use that to throw a copy across a heap if you needed to. And it's
Yeah, we could always consider adding that.
But the thing about that is it's always O of 1 to get back to where you were. Always, always, always in all cases.
I think typically if you're crossing an await, you probably have a whole new sequence to parse with additional data.
Not
right?
necessarily. Say that you've already read all of the data and you're simply parsing it in a manner that requires asynchronous code. Maybe you're processing it and then writing to the network somewhere or writing to disk. But yes, you're right. If you're reading in a loop, like the sequence is going to keep changing.
So the primary situation I would see people actually wanting to use set position is like calling other APIs. It actually came up initially because people were calling index of on the read-only sequence and wanting to set that for a sequence reader. So that's one thing. Arguably, we get rid of all those things. We make sure there's equivalents for all that functionality inside sequence reader. But there are other ones that you may be trying to call some API on another library that you don't control, and you can't add in something that takes a sequence reader, takes a sequence, and it gives you back a sequence position about what it's consumed.
Yeah.
So, but you want to still keep your context about how many bytes you've done.
But do we actually have those?
You can write
scenarios
it.
right now?
It's just awkward to write. And we
So-
can do it faster.
So the alternative to this is essentially we tell people you have to keep track of your own consumed count and just create a new sequence reader.
Well, that's one option, or you can just, presuming that your position is actually post where you actually have it, you would forward it the amount of bytes that you have done. And you can calculate that by getting the count. But that, again, that's kind of expensive. It's not terrible. I mean, underneath the covers, the sequence positions are just like indexes.
Yeah.
So
I feel like if this is an anti-pattern, telling people, hey, keep track of your own count is better.
Because the way that you would, if we didn't have this API, the way that you would seek is you start off with some sequence reader, you get back the current read-only sequence and the current span index. You persist those two properties. You create a brand new sequence reader, passing in the read-only sequence that you persisted, and then call advance the number of bytes in the current span index. And now your states are identical.
well, it's
And it was
advanced
all one.
consumed. You would get the total consumed.
Hmm?
You would get the total consumed, not the current span.
No, current span index, that property.
No, you wouldn't. You would get total consumed.
From current span index?
No, there is a consumed property on sequence reader.
Yeah, I'm not looking at that property. The only properties I'm looking at are sequence and current span index. That's it. Those two properties alone are enough to round trip the state of a sequence reader in O of one time.
No, they're not. Because you may not be in the same segment.
Current span index is not throughout the whole sequence. It's only for this current segment.
Because the read okay, it's not a segment, yes. Sorry.
Yeah, the consumed is the total segment consumption.
So you could use consumed or position. Track kind of
Correct.
where you are currently.
You can't forward to, currently there's no way to forward to a particular position. You can only forward
Okay, never mind.
counts.
So it looks like for set position, even though setting the position on this underlying sequence is not O of n, it's just O of 1, setting the state of the reader requires you to go through the segments anyway, for example, consume. So it becomes O of n for the number of segments you have. And that happens always.
If you're doing it yourself, and like, Asin and I looked at this briefly yesterday, if you happen to set for a position that's in the current segment, we can see that.
Is there a scenario where I want to back up to a position where the sequence reader already was at some previous point in time? If that's a scenario, we need an O of 1 way to do it somehow. Like O of n's not acceptable for that scenario. So that means we should probably ditch this API and write an O of 1 to do that.
I don't think it's possible. It's feasible.
It is feasible. You can serialize the state of the sequence reader. The sequence reader is generated. The constructor of the sequence reader is itself generated from non-ref structs.
The O of 1, presuming you don't care, you don't have to cross an async boundary.
No. I mean, all of there should be a way for me to go back to a previous state, regardless of where that previous state was in O of 1 time.
Yes,
and that should be
copied.
the API we promise to people.
Now there is more state in this thing that, like, to get back, that's not obvious. Because you need the next. Like I said, you have the original sequence, then you have two positions, and consumed is another part.
So how about
Length you can recalculate again if you want. But
it looks like set position requires a bit more thought.
Yeah.
How about we just remove the API from the current proposal, approve the rest, because it seems the rest nobody has a disagreement with.
Yeah.
And then we just come back with, how do you basically snapshot and resume effectively in an efficient way, right?
And I'm fine with that. Can you bring up what your notes are so we can do one last look at it?
Absolutely.
One thing that's probably worth mentioning is, Jeremy, there were proposals for advanced and TryPeek that take sequence position. Is there a reason why you chose to omit them here?
Same reason.
Same reason as well.
That I was uncomfortable with the set position.
I see. So once
it makes it difficult to write good code, and it also makes it difficult to comprehend what's going on in the reader, what performance characteristics of things are. More difficult. So very hesitant to add things that take a sequence position without serious logging of the concept. So
it's good that you identified this as a potential anti-pattern, though, because it's always good when we can have those discussions ahead of time rather than reactively.
Yeah.
Given that it's all early,
concerned as well about this.
Yeah.
So we have AdvanceToEnd, which didn't change any. Unread sequence is now read-only.
So if we are going to have set position in the future, AdvanceToEnd should be having a position word on it. I mean, set position at toEnd or something.
So there's two APIs that are not shown here. Is TryPeek 2 that takes a sequence position and AdvanceTo that takes a sequence position. And Jeremy omitted them because he wanted to first resolve the set position concern.
Okay.
I think that's what would cover your scenario that you're mentioning.
I'm just talking about the name, about AdvanceToEnd. I mean, should be set position at end or something like this.
Well, we already have advance.
Yeah, advance is where is it?
Yeah, I think the idea is that we can make this more performant than passing in a sequence at the end.
Yeah. The other thing is we already have the advanced terminology. I mean, we don't have the set position terminology, so we could choose to rename that one, but we can't rename advanced. I mean, we don't have advanced 2, but we have advanced. But advanced and seems weird. So.
I give advanced past.
Yeah, advanced past and also makes no sense, right? So I think the only one that makes sense here is advanced event, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, the other idea about also in the future, if we have set position, so we can have some way of saying set position to the end somehow. You don't have to pass position, but you can have something. Yeah.
I'm going to regret asking this question. There's a rewind method on SequenceReader right now, correct?
Yep.
What's the algorithmic complexity of that method?
Good.
It's O1 or O-N.
Worst case O of M?
Yeah.
Good enough? No?
The point of SequenceReader is to read potentially adversary-controlled data, including the ability to chunk it.
Yeah. I mean, somebody else in chat asked, every API that takes so long, what happens if you pass in negative values you throw, right? You only accept positive values, right?
Yeah,
so
just like with ins.
Yeah, so you can't go back, right? So the only way to go back is basically via set position or...
Yeah, so the initial intent, as Jeremy was mentioning, that SequenceReader was meant for forward only. The rewind was the one API that we added for escape hatch for you to revert. So rather than you having to remember to keep a copy of SequenceReader, and that's the only one that has these perf characteristics.
When you say it's ON, what is the N?
Number of segments.
No, well, yes, but the number of segments, but that is controlled by the other end.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Now, the most common scenario, and the reason we added, it's ON if you set the position from the beginning.
Yeah.
But the most common scenario is that you're actually not going to be crossing a segment, so that's why we added that.
But I still don't understand, what is the N specific to? So if I say, go back, rewind 5.
It's the number of segments
if you're not,
to get to that 5.
Yeah.
So if the 5 is
the number,
the same segment,
it's O1.
It's O1.
Yep. If it's not in the same segment, it's O.
It has
The
to
number
start
of
from the
segments before this.
I have to go backwards, right?
You have to start from the beginning.
You can only come from the
and then move
start. You
forward.
can't go backwards in a read-only sequence.
So when they're in the 100th segment, and when I say rewind 5, and it's I'm at the 3rd character, That means you have to iterate 100 segments to get me.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, the problem with this is your sequence reader is meant to be used in a loop, which means you're already n segments in because the loop has had to iterate that number of times. And somewhat like you now have to say rewind 1 byte, for instance. Like if someone is sending you data chunked 1 byte at a time, they have now coerced you into doing O of n squared work.
And I guess rewind is nothing we can do with already.
Well, and if someone really had to frequently backtrack, they could always just cache the last X segments
Yes.
that they
Yes.
adopted.
Which is why we should probably have a first class, like, please revert to my original state API.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's what other parts of the stack have
Yeah.
done.
Like, you've already seen this state. Literally just copy it from somewhere on the stack and overwrite this.
It's a pretty big struct, and that's the only issue.
That's okay because the struct would only be used by people who actually need to back up.
Yeah, I mean, stack size is relatively cheap, right?
Well,
unless the
if it's
second
all in the
gigabyte.
stack, then revert to previous is just assign a
Yeah,
copy of
Yeah,
the reader.
it's literally a mem copy.
Yeah.
And you're done.
Of
And
like,
copies over 1. For large constant.
right, so that means we just assume we are fucked for rewind. Probably in the future we would obsolete the method then and say like use the other one.
Probably, yeah.
Well,
That seems not unreasonable.
I don't know I don't know we do that because like rewind. I'm not entirely convinced on that because like rewinding when you're in the most of the time you're in the same span. So it is way cheaper to like just set the index in the span.
Most of the time that's true, but when we're designing APIs that are intended to be used over network data, for instance, like we have to assume that the worst case is something that can happen. We have to assume that the worst case is something that the other end can coerce into happening with high probability.
Except this is if
I
somebody
don't know that you can do that with a read-only sequence. Is to have it. Your read-only sequence is a sequence of buffers. They're not remote unless you got a memory, I guess. I don't know. I'll definitely talk with you about it sometime here, Levi, to better understand what you're talking about.
I mean, my point is just worst case, we would obsolete the API, call people to the other API, and then that will be unfortunate, but you know, there's certainly worse things we have done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the end of the world. I mean, like, I think I can even consider like maybe I think detecting whether an offset of 5 bytes is within the same segment should be relatively cheap though, right? So you should be able to say, worst case, we say the contract of the method changes to, if it's within the same segment, it succeeds, otherwise it blows up, and you have to call the other method beforehand if you want to avoid that, if you want to optimize that path, right?
Yeah.
But I mean,
we should also, as part of these reviews, get into the habit of documenting algorithmic complexities of these methods.
yeah, I mean, the one thing that is a bit unfortunate are things like this, where we teach people span things as cheap, and then this is the one that allocates. That's kind of like surprising, but I also don't see necessarily a way around that in all cases, right? The only alternative would be we just don't give people the API, period. But
so a TryPeek method, honestly, like I would have expected that to
fail.
Either give me the span if it can be represented as a span, or return false.
But what are the other cases where it returns false?
your length is larger than how much you have.
But you already have all of that information. Like all of the other try methods in the framework don't fail if the inputs are invalid. They fail if the input can't be parsed.
Usually it's not useful to return false in cases where the caller can easily check whether something is true or not, right? It's more useful to pick the error case that the caller has a really hard time detecting. Like, if this is invalid, well, I would have to re-implement the method, so that's not easy for me
I
to
think
do.
we have a remaining bytes or something on SequenceReader, correct?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's just awkward to write that as opposed to like when you in the parsing loops that people are doing.
Yeah, it's
they're just calling TryPeek over or TryRead2 and things like that over and over and over again until it says it can't get anymore.
Yeah, I think the question, and this is kind of like where David was very hand-wavy. It was like what they would do in Kestrel, right? And it sounded like what he said was like, well, we have some sort of gross solution where we basically do the heuristic where if it's certain threshold, we stack allocate. If it's not, then we do this other thing. And
in some cases, but in other cases, they're doing, and that's where I got this from to begin with. They're just essentially getting the sequence into arraying it.
Fair enough.
I guess the part of the
So
question
they're
would be-
effectively doing exactly what the one that returns a read-only span does.
Yeah.
The question is
They're
it
just
better
doing-
for it to
It's
be
just
user
ugly
code
because it's
to
exposed.
array?
I mean, they're having to
Ultimately.
manually do it rather than having it.
Well, I mean, this goes more to the. I mean, there's these competing things, right? There's usability, and then there is, am I successful because when I use the APIs, I know that I'm not accidentally writing myself an ON squared algorithm, right? And I think the problem with these kind of APIs is that I think none of them are designed around usability from the point of view that if you really just want to parse a file, like you would not bother with these APIs because there's way easier ways from the framework to do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Like if you care about Perf, then you care, and then you're willing to write 100 lines of code, but then if you basically have to fight the APIs because they are not telling you when you accidentally allocate, then that's maybe not the best way of doing
Well,
it.
especially in something that we're promoting as our high performance data parsing API.
Yeah, that's my only concern with it allocating is if you really want performance, then even the rare allocation.
I mean, on the upside though, like if you are in this domain, I think it's okay if you use a sequence reader. People kind of have to have a mental model of what this is backed by, right? Like it's not like you can't really abstract away that it's a linked list of buffers, right? That's something you have. So I mean, once you look at your performance profile, which the other thing is if you care about perf, you hopefully profile your shit, and then it will be very obvious if you have payloads that suddenly allocate, and then
Which is, yeah, we
that's okay.
spent a long time ass on me going back and forth on this thing and profiling the characteristics of reading the JSON through. So,
right,
it's a reasonably educated guess, but about what the performance characteristics of the allocations are. But we did find that it wasn't worth the hassle, basically.
I mean, the other question really is like, how often does this happen, right? If the buffers are reasonably large and the things usually get out are reasonably small, then the chance of you actually running into the crossing buffer is rare. And even if it is happening, well, you're not allocating 4K, you're allocating something on the realm of 100 bytes.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, in that case, who cares, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what this is fine-tuned for. Is that the simplicity of the model here with the slicing ended up being significantly faster than trying to optimize for the rare case where it went across.
Right.
So that goes down a really slow path and allocates, of course, and stuff like that. But it in all of the dials that we turn back and forth, it made the most sense this way.
Yeah, but to Levi's point, though, I think we need to get into a habit. Like we used to spend a lot of time writing, borderline useless documentation where we just tell people this API is not thread safe, which is true for 99% of our APIs, right? But what the actual algorithmic complexity is, or whether it allocates or not, is in some areas a much more useful information.
Yeah, but for APIs like this, we discuss this heavily, right? It's not like they fall in discuss.
Yeah, but we just need to write it down so that it makes its way into the document.
Like unless you watch these videos, you don't know this.
Because we used to have types like list of t-string and so on. We would actually document the methods as of whatever runtime. Right. We've kind of fallen out of that habit, unfortunately. But for APIs like this, where we're promoting their use in high performance scenarios, it's important for people to know.
All right, so then I just posted this. I will mark it as API approved for the stuff that we actually have. And then we can cover some other stuff. Is there anything else that somebody wants? Otherwise, I would go over the one that Steve talked to me about, where there is this boolean formatting proposal. Anybody else?
Okay, let's talk about that.
Go for it.
Does anybody know the issue number quickly? The formatting.
Does Steve know the issue number?
Not off the top of my head. I thought I was done with it, and then I'm not. So
this will be a quick one.
And now it's going to take the remaining 35 minutes.
I don't think it will,
So
because I think the answer is, I would assert pretty obviously.
It looked like a bad idea to me.
Yeah, I was about to say
there was
that.
an unknown that I wasn't aware of.
Sorry, it's 8126.
You're good. 8126.
It's an old issue.
Right, what's
Yeah,
what
we're
it's
going
saying?
from 40,000 to 8,000. Nice.
So I will do my best to give the unbiased summary while Emo's bringing it up. There currently is no format string for Boolean, right? There's a toString that's parameterless, and it outputs true or false.
Yeah,
Whereas for int and date time and whatever else, you can pass a string format to toString, and that controls how the data is rendered. Same format string can also be used in like the strings passed to string.format. So you can say, open brace, 0, your format string, close brace, and everything after the colon ends up getting passed to the toString method on the relevant type. The request here is to do the same with Boolean. So to make bool be iformatable, which it is not today, and therefore add the relevant bool.toString that takes a string format, and then also do the same with a try format for span, and have the format be to take the string. Hold on a sec. Thank you. To take the string that was after the colon and allow that to basically contain both the true and false value that you want to be used. So I think, here's an example to basically be like, on and off or yes and no. And I believe there was also a request for it to be able to also have a third for nullable bool. So yeah, that's the basic summary.
That seems like a lot of complexity for something where you could just write a ternary expression and write it in a helper method if you really needed it that frequently.
Yeah, I mean,
That's my
like,
opinion as well.
I mean, this example here, like, I mean, I agree with the general, okay, this looks terse and sexy, right? But the problem is, I think as Steven said somewhere else, this is just not how any of our other formatting stuff works, right? I mean,
Yeah, because if you really wanted to, you change that semicolon or that colon to a question mark. You add a quote. You change the semicolon to a colon, and you add quotes, and you're done.
well, to be fair, that's not quite as simple because you can't really use a colon inside of a.
You have to put parentheses.
You have to put
but
parentheses
whatever.
about it. Like, it looks ugly. I get that, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, I'm kind of like, how often do you write code like this?
Well, how do you localize this too?
Well, apparently you could, because they are localizable in principle, right? You could just say this is a resource string or something, right?
Well, normally when we say that we have on and off, right?
Right.
Like, say those are relatively common terms that we would probably want to localize in other languages, and we would probably be relying on the operating system to give us a localization of those terms.
Right.
Well, I think in this case, the request is you take a custom format string. The custom format string, all it knows is semicolon and colon, and or a semicolon, and it basically does a split. And the first half is true, the second half is false. Whatever that text is the request here. It's not you should recognize specific patterns like on, off, or things like that. It's you should take any string, and true should be the first half, and false should be the second half, and for nullable.
How do you escape
third
semicolons?
half.
Do we need to introduce escape characters now? Like, how do you escape a semicolon?
Yeah, we'd have to change all the parsing support in string format.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, again, like format strings are usually, there's free text, but it's basically parsable text, right?
Yeah.
It's not meant to be human readable text, right? Human readable text is supposed to go outside of the format string.
I think if people really wanted this, then a better solution would be to have a toString method that wasn't iformatable, and it literally took true string, false string
Yes.
as the two parameters, rather than a format and a format provider.
But at that point,
You can also do it with your own type. I mean, there's
Right,
nothing
exactly.
special about Boolean here.
But at that point,
I
you're
believe-
literally writing more characters than a simple ternary operator to do the exact same thing.
Yeah, the problem is, though, because you have to escape it, right? In this case, it's if you actually write it down, it looks fairly ugly if you do in-string interpolation, because you can't use a raw semicolon in
It's
there.
not that ugly. I wrote it either above or below this comment.
Yeah, I think like it's less ugly than a function call. Like all I'm
Yeah.
saying is I would probably just write a function call, like, I don't know, translate or some other method that I have an extension method over bool and nullable bool and then it takes 2 or 3 arguments and I'd be done with it. I mean,
Yeah, like
that would not be horrible, right?
Not only is that simple, but it's also like significantly more performant than having the framework parse out something for a Boolean expression.
Yep.
Can you pull up Steve's example?
Yeah, again, I was looking for
It's
it.
down below, I think.
Yeah.
Get right
Oh,
there.
it's this.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just copy and paste this.
I guess a question I would have is, where do we end the fight to avoid ternary statements? Because you might have, there are X number of values, and you would probably have a ternary saying, do I say value if it's 1, or values if it's 0
So
or more than 1?
expand it to a generalized switch. You mean like, if I take an int, then I want to be able to put out this value if it's 0, this value if it's 1, this value if it's 2, and so on.
My point is, like, it's not that uncommon to need a ternary in string.def format already, so we're just removing one case of that. So how useful is it to just remove the one case?
Well, I guess in this case, I mean, the other types are by definition open-ended input space. I mean, sure, constrained by bitness, but practically speaking, in n number of values versus this one, it only has 2 states, right? So the Boolean only has realistically 2 values anybody cares about. So in that case, it kind of is not horrendous to say maybe we should have APIs on bool that honor that and specializes that for terseness reasons, right? But I think the mechanism is just the wrong way of doing it. Like if we really, really cared for this scenario, I would say it's still better to have an extension method somewhere, because then we can define it over nullable of bool as well if we really had to, because we can't put it anywhere else. And for bool, I mean, yeah, we just have an API that takes 2 strings and gives you back a string. I mean, like that. I mean, but again, like the implementation is the one-liner, which is very obvious to write. And I would generally say if your domain has to do something a lot, I think it's okay to say, yeah, define yourself a 2-line helper method to save yourself 2 lines 100,000 times, and then you only have to write 50,000 lines. But I mean, that's what programming is. I mean, we don't have to provide every single shorthand.
If we provide such a method, there's going to be a war over is true 1 or is true any non-zero value.
Well, there's a clear answer to that.
Someone also made a good point. That
this is the framework we follow the IL spec.
Okay. It's not the language we don't follow the, yeah. Yeah.
Someone down here made a point that the word that you would use for true or false is also context depending on the language. So
yes, and
like I don't like the fact today that we output a capital T and a capital F.
I literally just submitted a PR yesterday to Courseular. The only occurrence of too lower, the parameter list too lower we had in all of Corelib, was to change the true false capitalized to be lowercase.
Very nice. Clearly, we should just hard code that as a special case into lower.
That's right.
Yeah, I think this honestly does not, like, considering the complexity we would have to deal with to do it via formatting, I would just reject that proposal. If somebody wants to bring it as a method, maybe, but even that I would reject as it's a 1-line implementation. Like, come on,
just write your own extension method, toString, that takes true string, false string, and then ternary that, and then you can call toString 2 things.
Yeah.
Or someone can write their formatable Boolean type, put it up in a NuGet library that does whatever it wants in its iFormatable implementation.
Yep.
System.rejected proposals.
I like it. It's like the journal of null results.
Yeah, I think that.
Yeah. But localizing these two would actually require changes to the, what is it, like text info class? Something like that.
Yeah.
Like it actually does have significant API churn. Oh, well.
Oh, we do. So we do have boolean that takes iFormat provider. So what you could do is you could create a custom culture that wraps the current culture, but only changes true string and false string.
Wow.
You could.
Yes, you could. It's kind of brilliant and kind of devious.
You add semicolons instead. GitHub doesn't like.
What's that character at the end of your
It's a period.
form? Why is it
Although, don't
highlighted?
we currently totally
C#
ignore the
doesn't
format.
allow periods. It should be semicolon.
Sorry,
Oh, okay.
what was that,
That's an
Steven?
error.
Don't we completely ignore that argument today?
Fair enough.
Do we?
Yeah, we do.
Yes, we do.
This is valid C#, correct? I'm not criticizing this.
It is, in fact, valid C#.
Oh no, you have brackets problem.
You're
On,
missing the at the end of the to state.
Look
You're
at
not
on,
closing
off.
the method call.
Yeah, you're
Better
you're
than-
missing a parenthesis before the bracket from the two-state
Oh,
call.
I see. See, this
No,
is
we,
why.
we get like
Type
error
of-
checking.
I didn't know that.
Well, somebody wrote a regex. That's what's happening.
Oh, well, right.
Yeah,
Also,
but, the poster is going to come back and say that this only applies to cases like this where the caller wants to determine what the data is versus having some library that the string is passed to do the replacement.
I'm not sure what that means. You're saying that,
So,
but if I make
with
it
string format, it doesn't matter. But if you were to pass this string to, his example was Serilog or something, where it could interpret the state and do something different if it wanted to. I don't know. I'm trying to channel.
Yeah, I'm not sure how his proposal would fix that though, because you still have this problem that somebody is controlling what values they are, right? And that doesn't compose, right? Somebody, I mean, right? You have to somehow give people the format string, right?
The thing is, like,
Right.
it is possible to do this already. Clearly, like, the framework's been around for 2 decades and people have been doing this. And, like, is there enough value to the ecosystem for us putting first-party support for this into the product?
Nope.
Probably nowhere else we would have done it in the past 2 decades.
Yeah.
If it were like if it were crazy complicated to write this code, then maybe there would be a reason for us to put this in. But
Yeah, and maybe first you should fix the existing overloads that take iFormatable to use culture-specific information.
yeah, which we don't have
Right.
for true and false.
All right, let's just get this over with, because I think actually in this case you can just close it, right? All right. So before we go over the list, like Stephen asked this question, and I did not have a good answer. So when we go through our backlog, we have, if you just look at API suggestion, I think this thing is exploding to, like, I don't know how many issues we have, but probably more than 5.
Are suggestions things not marked ready for review?
Yeah.
Or?
Yes, basically because API suggestions. So the idea originally from the process was that, API suggestions are basically catered, not catered. What's the term? Shepherded by the area owner to the point where they become API ready for review, right?
392.
And so the question is now, given that some of them are, years old and there's nothing happening with those, how are we going to move them forward? Are we moving them all to the new repo, or are we actually cleaning them up, or are we just bulk closing them all and then just, if you really want them, file them again, please?
Have the area owners go through them. I mean,
Yes.
someone took the time to open them.
I think, like, in general, like, it seems like, we should just, that was the same thing I said, like, every area owner should just go over their stuff and then decide which ones are worth pushing on and which ones aren't. And then we should just push on them, and then, depending on I don't know when the repo merger is happening. We could do this before, but given everybody's busy with 3.0 right now, maybe that's a bad time to do it. But somewhere between now and then, we should do it. And then if that happens after the merger, well, then too bad. We just migrated more issues than we had to. But given that it's basically GitHub on the back end, it's also not like whether they have to move 5,000 issues or 4,892 doesn't make a difference.
I mean, don't they need to move all of our closed issues too?
No, I don't think we would ask them to do that.
Well, should we start going through these then?
Well, I mean, I'd rather go over the ones that are ready because they're actually actionable.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the other ones are the area owner has to get them into an actionable state.
Okay.
Yep.
Does that answer your question, Stephen, or do you have different opinions on those?
I mean, I was really looking for input. The fact that we have it's 392 API suggestions. I think we have another 400 API needs work.
Oh yeah, those are the interesting ones too. Yeah.
'Cause those are the ones we've partially reviewed, right?
Yeah.
Either that or
Those are ones area owners have seen.
yes.
And I think we've been a little inconsistent about API suggestion versus API needs work. So I think a bunch of new ones that have been opened have just been tagged as API needs work.
Yeah.
So we basically got 700 proposals that aren't ready to be reviewed yet, and some of them have been sitting there since 2015.
Okay.
Did we set up a separate meeting from this one where we can just plow through these and find the ones that are obvious no's and close them?
Well, we would need the feature area owners to be present there because they're the ones that are going to have the best context.
Yeah, I think we just need a call to action of like go through your issues, close them, look for ones that are duplicates because I know we saw like a couple weeks ago Ben had opened at least 2 issues that were related to the span.
Yeah.
And we can merge them together. Yeah.
Right.
But that's actually a good point though, because I imagine the feature area owners are probably going to be able to filter out as a first pass a quarter of them maybe, and then for the remainder they might have questions that this committee can then help with making a final determination.
Maybe we should have a separate label for identifying things which are suggestions from community, because I think that's the logic that the bot's currently using for, and what some people are using for like, if this is just an API suggestion from the community, mark it as API suggestion. Maybe we should have something separate for this is an issue that is something that we want to move forward, but it needs work, but it's not been reviewed yet.
But no, I don't know if that's necessary because API needs work covers that, doesn't it?
Well, API needs work is currently, it was marked as approved, it came here, we looked at it, and then we rejected it saying it needs more work before we could approve it.
And why would you want to distinguish between that scenario and one where an area owner said it needs work?
I mean, like it seems to me if we ever got to the state ready for review, that means we want to go forward with the API. We think it's a good idea, and then we just couldn't agree on the shape. That's why it came back.
I interpret.
Yeah, but most of these have not. Most of these API needs work have not been to.
Go for it, Stephen.
We're saying most of these API needs work have not ever been API ready for review.
Yeah, I think that's the inconsistency because when we started, we had too many labels. I think moving forward, the idea is an API always starts an API suggestion.
Right.
But even that to me is kind of fishy. Why do we even care about this label? Because to me, it's like there's somebody filed an issue for the area owner. The area owner has to decide what to do with it. Yeah. And if it's a bug, it stays open as a bug. If it's an API suggestion, at some point it gets API ready for review, and that's it.
Yeah, I guess it's not clear because like I've got 16 issues under numerics that are API suggestion. There's a couple of them that I'm going to end up closing as I don't think this is applicable. There's a couple where I think it'd be good, but the community needs to come in and write a proper spec proposal because I don't have time to do it.
Right.
And then there's a couple where it's a good suggestion, but we probably need more data. And I don't think it's necessarily good to close the issue on, we want more data before we do this.
So in that case, would you mark that as API needs work? The ones that either needs more data or the one where you need the community to drive and come up with a good proposal?
No, I think that's a general issue that we have, which is regardless of APIs. If we think the caller is onto something that might look interesting, but we are not the ones who drive it,
up for grabs.
We need to have some sort of label that says, okay, you have some time, and if you don't react, it will close automatically. Because I think it's the idea of like, okay, this is not a bad idea, so we will not reject it out of the gate, but we don't feel passionate about driving this. If you feel like it, go for it. Otherwise, it will just fall off the radar because eventually we will go to close it.
Yeah, maybe I don't think up for grabs is right because a lot of people interpret that as this issue is up for grabs to be implemented.
Yes.
Not.
Yeah.
I think we really need something like a needs more data tag
Or
that
design.
indicates.
Maybe.
Yeah, or something that says like we want more input from the community on why this is a good idea. What scenarios do you need this for?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that go and just like thumbs up, I
Yeah.
want this, but
Yeah.
they don't provide any context of why it would be useful to them. And maybe Imo should write a blog post.
Well, I mean, that we could do that, but I think like this is the general thing where I think what is the bot that we're using right now for auto merging when CI passes? Like that same bot has basically the same thing that the Pro bot has for stale issues, right? And I think there's some controversy around when we close issues, but I really think for issues where we think okay, the ball is on the court of the issue opener or somebody else. You have some time. We can agree on what that time frame is, whether it's 60 days or 30 days or 10 days, and we just close it. And it's like, yep, sorry, you had time. If you want it, you can reopen it. I mean, like, it's not a one-way street, but to me, it's a bit weird that we're in a state where we have like 600 or 800 or 900 open issues, and we just create effectively work for ourselves to go over things that nobody cares about. It seems like backwards.
Yeah.
I'd rather spend the time looking over things that anybody actually cares for, because then we actually make the product better. And I think that's the idea of like basically having a bot close things. It's like, well, you just focus on the things that are actionable and you exclude the things that aren't. So I think that's a general API. No, that's not. I think what I just said is not just for APIs. It's for any issues that are being filed. Right? If somebody files a bug that nobody can repo, nobody thinks is important, same thing. Like you have some time. If you don't respond, issue gone. This way, we at least, this is what we used to do in the old days when we had centralized bug trackers, and I think it has been proven to be at least a process where we stay on top of what's going on, rather than everybody's used to the fact that the backlog is 20 pages and nobody actually cares what's in there.
How do you handle the cases where one person has an idea, it doesn't gain traction, so we close it, but then other people also want to chime in saying, hey, I think this is actually useful?
Well, they can still comment on it.
Right
like closing doesn't mean you lock the issue. It just means you're like, okay, I don't think it's a good idea.
One thing I have noticed though is people tend to see closed issues as not actionable, and then they open new issues that are affecting duplicates.
Well, there's a certain amount of education that needs to happen, but like whoever closes the issue needs to write why they're closing it, right? And then you're basically saying, well, we think this is a bad idea, closing, and then well, if somebody opens the same issue again, you're like, no, we already said we don't want to do it. You just keep closing it, right? And if people are just, idiots about it and then they just keep opening new issues, at some point you just tell them, look, stop or we kick you out. Like, I mean, this is not a
No, it was the opposite. It was
denial
like
of service thing.
10 independent people come up with the same proposal over time, but each of them had like one.
Well, but that can happen, right? But I mean, sometimes what also happens if the first person does a really bad job explaining what the scenario is, and then the third person does a good job, that's also fine, right? I mean, also the product is not the same, in every year, right? Sometimes our priorities shift from, for example, what happened to us, right? We didn't care about perf originally, now we really deeply care about perf. And it's also okay to file an issue again. I don't see a fundamental problem when you have duplicates over like 4 or 6 years, because, well, priorities have shifted, team members have shifted, strategy has shifted, and maybe it's actionable now. But I also think that having an issue that is 4 years old and open forever, like, is not going to help anybody. Because we're not going back and assign our new work. Oh, is there other issues we can associate this work with? No, we're just never going to look at it again. So that's why I think like we need some sort of like mechanism to just take care of stale issues. And ideally we have a label that can say, yep, somebody else is on the hook. And if nobody is ever responding to this, we just close it and say, well, we gave you a chance. And then, but again, it's not a one-way street. People can reopen it if they feel like it. Or the person who filed it at least can reopen it. And if somebody else feels wrong, they just open a new issue. And most people will do the right thing, link to the old one and says, okay, I think this is still actionable, and then you do something about it. So I think it's largely a self-correcting thing.
While we're looking at API labels, can we see how many are API approved?
Yeah, so that's what I did at some point, like where I looked at API approved, and then I think I filtered down to milestone, I believe. Yeah, of course that doesn't work. Wouldn't it be nice if this text box would be slightly bigger, like just slightly?
We also have quite a bit of like potential up for grabs issues that people can either implement or
Well,
backlog for
like 10 of those are the ARM intrinsics that we're going to be working on for .NET 5 anyways.
Yeah.
So
But
that's
it's a
like
good point.
fourth of those approved APIs already.
I mean, it's a good point that we should track things that are approved but nothing happens, right? Because clearly that's wrong, right?
Yeah, what's the oldest one?
That one's
Yeah.
actually being implemented by someone in the community right now.
Yeah, I mean,
and there's
yeah.
they're communicating with Tarek on how to handle the cross-platform
I mean,
differences.
4 years, that's quite an expensive API, I give you that.
Well, when did we approve it?
That's actually fair. It might have been approved 2 months ago, right?
Yeah.
For all of them.
Yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, it's been approved for I think at least a year now.
But I mean,
Only 114 comments, that's not bad. Holy fuck.
it's probably hidden in the expand comments.
Thank you, GitHub. Oh god, now I have to find this fucker in the middle of the page, right? Oh god. Load more.
Search for similar.
Yeah, load more.
Our top post update will approve API shape 2017. At least
2 years.
At least that. Yeah, it's not going to load all of it. It's only loads of 10 or 20 at a time.
See, at this point, it was old enough, right? So we definitely approved it a while ago.
Yeah, I think with this one in particular, it was marked up for grabs because we weren't going to prioritize implementing it. But it's a commonly requested enough one. Yeah. But it's also complex enough that the average community member is not going to be like, oh, this one is one I could actually go and implement in a day or two.
Hey, there's one from Steven. Add UTF-8 to charset.
Didn't we actually end up doing that already?
There's an enumeration for charset?
Oh, for marshalling, I think, right?
Oh. Why 5?
Well,
are we following like the Winamp model of enum values now?
I could have sworn we added this.
Yeah, I thought we added something for maybe it was unmanaged type. Or...
The Winamp. Nice. Yeah, I think that's something we should probably go through and make sure that we assign drivers for those, and if the drivers are community, we should mark it as up for grabs, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe the question here is what is not marked up for grabs?
Levi, to answer your question, there's already a charset auto 4 in desktop.
Okay. So it's to prevent collisions, I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have 18 of those, which we should probably do something about.
What was the query you used to do not up for grabs?
You select the label, but you're not just clicking on it, you are alt-clicking on it. That adds the -1.
Oh, I see.
But you can generally just edit the query and put a -1 in front of it, which is exclusion. Yeah. What was the other one? API injection and API needs work should be triaged.
Do we have any comments on the live stream?
Owner. Basically, we should probably put some of the information in the wiki. I mean, we do have the API review process written up. I'm not sure it's actually reflective of what we actually do now, but I think it's still somewhat up to date. I'm not sure. I think Carol wanted to write up basically what the tags are supposed to mean, because he feels quite strongly about the tags.
Yeah.
But I also think this will probably get another major revision when we actually merge the repos, because we want to have a unified, labeling strategy and not like, 12 different labeling strategies inside the same repo.
There's probably also like at least 100 issues in core CLR that qualify as API proposals, but they're in core CLR, and so we don't track them.
Well, the good news is that problem will disappear because we stuff everything that is basically BCL in the same repo, so we no longer have that problem. But now we have 5,000 issues open. There's that.
I mean, so does Roslyn. Eventually, it just says 5,000 plus.
Yeah. Although Roslyn is also not like, actively working on a lot of things that are filed by the community in terms of, APIs and feature requests, right? Which is partially, I think, an outcome when you have a backlog that big. All right, so then we have 5 minutes left, so I think in 5 minutes we're not doing anything useful. Anything else? So what I will do is I will just send an email. No, before I send an email, I probably need to talk to Dan of like when the right time is to send that email, because I don't want to distract anybody from fixing 3.0 bugs.
Yeah.
But I think after that is largely worn down, we should probably do triaging of the remaining issues.
Well, and then I think a blog post explaining things to the community, in addition to any wiki updates or anything we do, might be useful.
Yeah, I think I want to hold back on that one, because whatever we do for 5.0 will probably have to change, and then have a blog post that is 4 months old and out of date.
Yeah, maybe that blog post should be part of a series. Like, I imagine we're going to do a blog post once the repos are merged. So maybe as a subsequent follow-up, there should be a blog post explaining, like, here's how API proposals are now done.
Yeah.
And it can explain things like, here's the recommended pattern for creating an issue, here's the good template, feel free to log issues, questions, things like that. Things that people may not know or that may get frowned upon on other repos, but we say are okay for our repo.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else? Otherwise, you get time back.
5 minutes. Yeah. We can be so productive in 5 minutes.
Nah.
We can introduce a memory leak.
You can pull a David Fowler and ask the question whether what's worse, a memory leak or memory corruption.
Definitely corruption is worse.
Well, I think he asked what's better, and I think everybody said.
Which would you rather have, like, under your Christmas tree?
A memory leak.
A memory leak?
Yeah. Way easier to diagnose a memory leak than a heap corruption.
Yeah, corruption means anything could be happening. Memory leak just means eventually I'll
All right, guys. Then I think I will close this beautiful thing, and then we will see each other later.